right, good evening. We're going to start our next lesson. Actually, this lesson is the beginning of a new unit, and we're going to be talking about fractions, and in particular, we're going to be adding and subtracting fractions that have different denominators. And previously in the work that we've done, the denominators were the same, but now we're going to be given numbers where the denominators are different, and we're going to have to figure out a way to add and subtract them. So let's go ahead and get started with our first lesson in this unit. Our learning goal is that students will be able to find the least common multiple of two whole numbers. So let's talk about that for a little bit and see what that means. A multiple. A multiple is simply the product of a given number and any other number. So let's look at an example. If we were given the number 2, we could find the multiple of 2, or the multiples of 2, by multiplying 2 by any other number. So if we multiply 2 times 1, we would get 2. If we multiplied 2 times 2, we would get 4. If we multiplied 2 times 3, we would get 6. And we continue on and on and on. We could do this forever. Let's look at another example. In this example, let's look at the number 5. If we were to look at the multiples of the number 5, we could do 5 and then 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And again, it goes on forever. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking for common multiples. That is, the multiples that these two numbers have in common. And so the way that we're going to do this, and the way that I've found is most successful in doing this, is look at the multiples of the larger number. So if we look at the multiples of the 5, we're going to see that we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And then compare that to the list of multiples that we have for 2. So if you see, we have 10 as a multiple of 5, and also 10 as a multiple of 2. We can continue looking and see that the next multiple that they have in common is 20. Okay, 20 is a multiple of 5, and you could also take 20 and divide it by 2, and you get 10. So 2 times 10 is 20, so that makes it a common multiple of both 2 and 5. And if you look, we can continue that series of numbers. 2 and 5 have common multiples of 10, 20, 30, 40, and so on. Again, that list will go on forever. But in our learning goal, we're most interested in finding the least common multiple. And the least common multiple is the smallest of the common multiples. And so if you look at our common multiples here, the smallest one is 10. So the least common multiple of 2 and 5 is 10. So let's go ahead and do a sample problem of that and see what it looks like when we try to solve. Our sample problem is we're going to find the least common multiple of the two numbers 12 and 18. Okay, so we're looking at our notes, and since we're beginning a new unit, now's a good time to review what our notes should look like. We're using the Cornell note format, the different sections of that. If you come 5 spaces down and draw a horizontal line, you're going to have a section up here in the top for our learning goal. And we already said that our learning goal is that students will be able to find the least common multiple of two whole numbers. We have another section here where we put our heading. In our heading, we always put our name, the date that we're taking the notes, and then a short description of what the notes are. So the notes today are going to be on least common multiples and least common denominators. Then we're going to draw a line 10 spaces over, and that's going to divide the area where we take our notes over here on the right, and then the area over here on the left where we're going to write questions or other information that would help us study. And then as we go all the way down to the bottom, we're going to go 10 spaces from the bottom and draw another horizontal line. And this area is where we're going to have our summary. So if you haven't done this already, go ahead and pause the video, draw your lines on for your Cornell notes, and make sure that you have everything correctly filled in. Also, we have this section up here at the top where we're going to identify where we believe we are on the scale at the end. So wait till the end of the video and then identify where you are on our scale from 0 to 4 as far as your understanding of least common multiples and least common denominators. Alright, so let's continue with the lesson. I've already written down the practice problem or sample problem that we're doing, and that's that we're finding the least common multiple of 12 and 18. You'll remember earlier in the video I said we're going to start with the larger of the two numbers, so we're going to start with 18. And we're going to find the multiples of 18, and we're going to start with the smallest one and keep going up until we find one that's common with 12. So let's start. We have 18. Well, the first multiple of 18 is 18 because 18 times 1 is 18. And so if you look at this, say, does 12 go into 18 evenly? Or is 18 a multiple of 12? Well, we know that the first multiple of 12 would be 12 times 1, which is 12. So that doesn't match. We can do the second multiple of 12, which is 12 times 2, which is 24. And that doesn't match. And you see 24 is bigger than 18. And so we can move on to the next multiple of 18. So if we do 18 times 2, we get 36. And so now we're going to check, is 36 a multiple of 12? Well, we've already done 12 times 1 and 12 times 2, so let's look at 12 times 3. If you do 12 times 3, you'll see, yes, that is the same. It's 36 also. So this 36 is the least common multiple of 12 and 18. If it wasn't this one, we would go to the next one. Alright, so we continue this process until we found a number that was common between them both. Alright, so we're going to go to the second part of our learning goal, and the second part of our learning goal is that students will be able to find the least common denominator and equivalent fractions of two fractions. So we're going to be given two fractions. They're going to have different denominators. We're going to find a common denominator, and then we're going to find the value of those fractions using that new denominator. So let's look and see what that looks like. So first let's start with the definition. The least common denominator is the least common multiple, that's what we just learned how to find, of the denominators of two or more fractions. So we have an example here. If we have 2/3 and 3/4, we're going to find the least common denominator, which is the least common multiple of 3 and 4. So if we look for the least common multiple of 3 and 4, we look at the multiples of the larger of the two, that's 4. And we look at the multiples and see if 3 is also a common multiple with that. So 4 times 1 is 4. 3 doesn't go into 4 evenly. 4 times 2 is 8. 3 doesn't go into 8 evenly. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 does go into 12 evenly. And so our least common denominator is going to be 12. So we need to know this because in order to add or subtract fractions, we need to first find the common denominator, and then once we find the common denominator, we're going to add or subtract those numbers just like we normally did, the way that we've previously learned, where we add or subtract the numerators and keep the same denominator. But in order to do that, once we find the common denominator, we have to change the fractions that we're given into equivalent fractions, or fractions that are equal to the fractions that we started with. So if we look at the example 2/3, When we change the denominator from 3 to 12, we see that we've made it 4 times larger. 3 times 4 is 12. Well, if we make the denominator 4 times larger, in order for it to be equal, we have to make the numerator 4 times larger. So then we have to multiply 2 times 4 to find the numerator. Well, of course, 2 times 4 is 8. And that gives us an equivalent fraction. So 2/3 and 8/12 have the same value. Even though they look different, they represent the same amount. So let's do a sample problem. In our sample problem, we're going to use the fractions that we've already been given, 2/3 and 3/4. And we're going to find the least common denominator, and we're going to find the equivalent fractions of these two fractions. Okay, so I've gone ahead and copied down the problem. We're going to find the least common denominator and the equivalent fractions of 2/3 and 3/4. So the first step that we have to do is we have to find the least common denominator. We talked about this already, but if we look at 4, we know that 4 times 1 is 4, 3 doesn't go into it. 4 times 2 is 8, 3 doesn't go into 8. 4 times 3 is 12, 3 does go into 12, and so our least common denominator is going to be 12 for both of our fractions. And then we ask ourselves, what times 4 is going to give us 12? Well, we know that 4 times 3 is going to equal 12. Well, if we multiply on the bottom of this fraction, we have to do the same thing on the top. Okay, and so we're going to do the 4 times the 3 equals 12, so we're going to do 3 times 3 to find the numerator, and that's going to give us 9. We do the same thing with the other fraction. We want to know 3 times what gives us 12. Well, we know 3 times 4 gives us 12. So since we do the times 4 on the bottom, we have to do the times 4 on the top to make sure that it stays the same value. And 2 times 4 is 8. And so it asks for the common denominator. The common denominator is 12. And it asks for the equivalent fractions. And the equivalent fractions are 8/12 and 9/12. So let's look at another sample problem and see how that's going to work out. In this sample problem, we're going to have 3/8 and 2/3. Okay, we're going to go about this the same way. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the common denominator, which means we're going to find the common denominator for 3 and 8. So we start off with the larger one. This time the larger one is 8. We go 8 times 1 is 8. Does 3 go into 8? No, 3 doesn't. So we go 8 times 2 is 16. Does 3 go into 16? No, it doesn't go in there. And then we do the next one. 8 times 3 is 24. Does 3 go into 24? Yes, it does. So 24 is going to be our common denominator. And now we're going to find our equivalent fractions. So we go 3 goes into 24 8 times. So we're going to multiply the bottom times 8, and we're going to multiply the top times 8. 2 times 8 is 16. 8 goes into 24 3 times, so we're going to multiply the 8 times 3, and we're going to multiply the top times 3. So it'll be 3 times 3, which is 9. So again, we found our common denominator, which is 24, and we also found our equivalent fractions, which is 9/24 and 16/24. Alright, so the next step is we're going to work some practice problems. Instead of doing practice problems on the video, what I need for you to do is go on to Moodle and take the practice problems for October 30th on least common multiples and least common denominators, and make sure that you get an 80% on that. If you don't, please retake it. and I'll be checking those scores in the morning and seeing who needs extra help then. So that completes our notes for tonight. Please remember to do the practice problems on Moodle, and have a great evening.